Hey, aloha, love tribe. Happy Thankful Thursday. I have somebody with me here who I'm ultra thankful for getting to meet you in Madeira. He is a dear, sweet friend and somebody who I've been lucky enough to start talking to about building a better world with Bitcoin. This is the CEO of Recursive Capital, Abubakar. Nur Khalil, welcome. Oh, you're
Thanks again for having
frozen.
me.
Oh, there you go. Good. You unfroze. How's it going?
Great. How's it on your end?
It's good. I wanna be where you are. Your background looks like somewhere I should be sitting out. We should be having some tea.
For sure.
Oh my gosh. So, how's it going? What have you been up to? You wanna tell everybody here, like, who you are and what projects you're working on and what's your big, giant super mission for planet Earth?
Definitely. I'll take it in those chunks, really. So,
Okay.
in general, I essentially am a Bitcoiner here in Nigeria. So, I'm the CEO of Recursive Capital, which is basically a Bitcoin VC that invests in Bitcoin companies, specifically in Africa. I'm also one of the board members of a trust called BTrust, where essentially one train developers through BTrust Builders, as well as also providing grants and also supporting initiatives like the developer education programs in places like the global south, essentially, and some conferences too that we've previously sponsored include the Afro Bitcoin conference, which is happening in December for anyone who wants to come and see the ecosystem. And then other than that, I do a variety of other things in the space, primarily around code. So contributing to Bitcoin Core, mostly code review. And then the recent wallet I launched called Vault, which essentially is supposed to be kind of a way for us African developers to kind of help with the global development of wallets in general, of what it means to have a Bitcoin wallet in 2024 with Lightning, the Breeze SDK, all that kind of stuff. So that's essentially what the majority of my time is. And other than that, I'd say, just playing Call of Duty and being helpful in the space.
Awesome. Do me a favor, move your microphone so it's directly in front because every time you move, it goes in and out of the quality.
How about now?
Because your voice is so good. You've got like the best radio voice ever. I would listen to you if you read me bedtime stories.
That'll be my next thing that I'll unveil. Bedtime tales with Abubakar.
I love it, Abubakar. Let's go. So you're obviously you've got your hands in a lot of different things that are overlapping and obviously on the big same mission to, get Bitcoin adoption out there and obviously in Africa. Why is it so important that we have more developers trained in Africa? Why do you think that's such an important initiative?
For a variety of reasons, I think primarily as Bitcoiners, one of the main things we can all agree on, regardless of where we are in the world, is that we want Bitcoin to continue being resilient. We want it to continue to have all the value propositions that we keep professing, like censorship resistance, ensuring that we have privacy first tools, all of that. And I think an important part of that is making sure that the folks that build on Bitcoin have that as a priority. And naturally, for us here in Africa and other parts, we already have a lot of issues that Bitcoin solves on that level. So it is in our interest perpetually for us to ensure that these are safeguarded on the protocol level. So I feel the more we have folks with that in mind, the better for everyone around the world.
And what's been the reception so far with the projects that you guys are working on? Like, what's your before and after, and how have people's lives, individually changed, and how have communities started to change because of these initiatives?
A lot. It's been very positive. I think what surprised me, at least personally, when we first started, and I'd say maybe talk about like initially with Gala, which got folded into BTrust Builders with BTrust, is we weren't exactly sure to what extent the appetite was there and to what extent the timeline would be from someone who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin, but is a developer all the way up to contributing to Bitcoin Core. I realized very quickly in under 2 years from all the way starting all the way up to work with BTrust that it doesn't take that long for African developers to actually become zeros all the way up to heroes, as some folks would like to characterize it. And I'll give two examples, really. One is Vlad. He's one of the first early engineers that we had come out of the education programs that we ran 2 years back. I'm part of the first cohort, and he was one of the leading devs that started contributing to the Bitcoin development kit. And then following from that success, last year we had another developer called Abubakar, who actually started learning not only just C++, but also protocol development. And by the end of the year, he was already a very dedicated Bitcoin Core contributor, to the point where right now he's involved in a couple of PRs that are really, really high level for those that are looking at protocol development on the mempool side and things like that. So it's been interesting to see, one, the reception, two, to see the successes very quickly in a short amount of time. And over the last 2 years, I see we probably trained like on the orders of hundreds of folks, really. So the program starts from mastering Bitcoin, essentially, where they run through the program 4 weeks, have a bunch of questions to get together, all the way up to a more intense version of that program. And then through that, they start to contribute to open source, because that's been a major priority for us, especially after the folding to BTrust. Because we realized that, yes, it's good to get them jobs in Bitcoin companies, but then the problem is the first folks that get cut off when we get into a bear market is essentially those who got the entry-level jobs. So for job security reasons, and obviously to help protect the kind of the ethos and general, I'd say, stack of the spaces, the idea was to have them go into open source, because that's always going to be around regardless of the market cycle. So yeah, we've seen a lot of successes. A ton of that has to do with also getting into communities with bit devs that we sponsored through BTrust in a variety of African cities. So we saw what that came with is each individual developer that was already through the programs, or at least going through some of those parts of the program, started kind of creating their own local ecosystem, because they don't force things down from BTrust. The idea is really to kind of make everything as organic as possible, where we're essentially just a touch point to kind of seed all these initiatives. So it's been cool to see them, one, create their own ecosystems, where we're able to help collaborate, and then have a giant umbrella of essentially one development community in Africa, which hadn't been the case like 5 years back when we all started. It was essentially just like 5 of us or maybe 10 of us around the continent loosely communicating and working. Whereas now we have like tens, if not hundreds of folks around the continent, not only just building, but constantly engaging with the community, engaging in hackathons that we sponsor. So it's definitely been great on the whole. And I think it's going to help catalyze the general development ecosystem in other parts too that are kind of adjacent to the Africa market. So places like South America, Latin America, and all those other parts.
And tell me more about the hackathons. Like, are they all virtual? Are they all in person? Are they a hybrid? How does that work?
It's been hybrid. So the ones that I'm specifically referring to has been the ones that we've attached to the Afro Bitcoin conferences. And cool. With that, one of the things that we started prioritizing was making sure it's not just only for developers to get in. Because you notice that obviously to get to the level of adoption that we need to make sure that we're building tools that people will actually use, we want to make sure designers are also involved, for folks that are doing product marketing, things like that, project management, sorry. So yeah, in general, we tried to increase the amount of participation so every single person that can provide value does have the opportunity to do so, not just developers.
And so you've got your hands in the VC world, which is obviously private, for profit, and then you've got open source and the grants. And so, I know you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago and about possible projects. So there's obviously pros and cons for projects to move forward in an open source format or in a for-profit format. Do you want to tell people here, like, how do you determine like how you're going to invest in things as a VC, and then how you're going to say, cool, this stuff should stay over here in open source?
Yeah, definitely. It's been an interesting learning process for me personally, because obviously I don't have like a decade's worth of investment banking or things like that. So it's kind of been mainly learning on the go. Obviously, it's been helpful that the ecosystem is not large enough where asking for help or listening to other folks and kind of meeting them is not an impossible thing to do. So a lot of it has been ensuring that at each point in time when I'm evaluating whether it's a project or hearing kind of ideas from entrepreneurs, to kind of bucket it into exactly where that fits in the overall ecosystem, because at the end, being under kind of a loose set of pipelines that each yield a different result at the end of the day, but all kind of compound to one thing, which is the general growth and maturity of the space. So for me, it's ensuring, okay, if I'm looking at this project, is it a case where there's a business case potentially that could be had? Then that's where the VC hat comes into play. Otherwise, we know, given the fact that it's such an early nascent market, we're not essentially going to have a lot of really wide variety of companies that have an insane amount of business case to the point where they're immediately profitable in like 3 months and things like that. So it's definitely going to be a journey, which is why even with Recursive, kind of prioritize walking some of the projects that are not there yet to ensure that they're at the stage where they're investable, obviously having the point that they're already a for-profit, at least driven on that mindset. But at the same time, given how early they are, we want to make sure that we're conscious in terms of the kind of entrepreneurs we're cultivating on the space, because again, there is no Bitcoin VC in Africa other than Recursive Capital. So a lot of the work that we've been involved in has been kind of defining what the landscape should be like, maybe the priorities, the things that entrepreneurs should be focusing on, and how to responsibly run a Bitcoin company, essentially. So not only in terms of funding the ones that we feel have that business case, but also ensuring that those that are coming on board understand that the best case scenario for them is making sure they prioritize the building, and then the growth kind of becomes a natural function of that. So yeah, splitting those two, ensuring that on the dev side, we have all the relevant resources, as well as kind of a well-paced pipeline for people that are trying to get into the space. So it's not a case where you have to be really early into the space and then walk through the whole pipeline. Want to make sure people that have gone through a certain part of that pipeline can come back and then have some other opportunities. So want to make sure we have all those sort of opportunities at each point, depending on the type of developer that already exists. So matching to the ecosystem as well as growing that. So I'd say that's how I kind of bucket the two.
That's amazing. And so for as far as like people getting jobs, well, I want to go back for a sec. What kind of projects are you investing in as a VC versus, what you're saying, okay, this isn't ready for investment yet?
So a lot of it has been around at least some of the two ways, basically. So one is some of the budding and very straightforward use cases that we see, obviously, with regards to, how it plays as a medium of exchange, things like that, and capturing that value at those across those type of opportunities. And then on the other side is trying to ensure that we're also on the lookout of emerging trends that have found use case essentially in the continent. So some of that has been in things like mining, for example, or even some of the work on the Lightning Network where you're allowing for, both remittances as well as some of the value for value use cases that are starting to come up. They're still not there yet. There's a lot of work to do. And then the interplay between that and Nostr and kind of how that would cascade into further use cases that we feel, honestly, right now we can't necessarily evaluate until we get to that point. So I say those two is kind of how we look at it. So they've been projects all the way up to Fedi with regards to collaborative custody, all the way up to Synoda, essentially ensuring their energy bill payments through the Lightning Network, because we feel sats are the most intuitive way you can measure energy consumption, especially for miners and energy producers, all the way up to BitNob, which will likely be one of the larger players here in the continent in terms of the maturation of the general space and what it means to be a Bitcoin company. So that's kind of where we bucketed out and how we're looking at the variety of use cases. So it's not just a case where we're just funding exchanges and wallets like was the case in 2018. Now there's a wide variety of companies that we're getting into as well as seeing emerge.
That's awesome. And I know, we had talked before about Wolf in New York, and they're doing, different accelerator type, these 8-week programs that are immersive. Are you guys going to be doing anything like that with Recursive Capital where, you might be taking some applications and then just having the mentors guide, some of these companies forward in this space?
Yeah, certainly. And so internally, we have been doing that for quite a few years now. And what we'd like to do moving forward is really make that more formal as a process. So a lot more folks in the space are aware of that part of Recursive Capital. So it could create that flywheel really that would help with the general pipeline of actual companies. And obviously it's also going to help with regards to kind of how we're optimizing essentially both the timelines it takes as well as some of the conversations. Because again, the general goal for us on the VC side really is obviously capturing the value for our LPs, but doing it in a way where it's a natural part of the growth of the ecosystem. So it's not a case where we're just kind of value extractors essentially. So providing an opportunity for folks to actually grow their business and that being kind of the way in which we're able to capture that value and making that part and parcel, not against kind of the growth in general, which we've seen in other ecosystems in general that haven't helped.
And so you had said earlier, you're the only Bitcoin VC in the entire continent of Africa?
Yeah.
That seems like such a huge opportunity, and we need more money to help developers and these businesses. Like why have more, why don't we have more funding in there? Or why don't we have more VCs? What's the holdup? Is it, just too many? I don't know what I want to hear. Like, why aren't we investing more here?
So there are a couple of reasons, and I'll just list them out essentially. So the first few ones, just to give kind of a quick background to is, so I launched Recursive in 2020. And back then, the closest thing we had to kind of capturing what was going on in the space here was Web3. Kind of lost with that battle in terms of how I characterized it essentially when I launched the introduction article was kind of ensuring that it's financial freedom through Bitcoin as well as, privacy preserving protocols as being the two things that contribute to Web3. Lost that naming battle, had to rebrand as a Bitcoin only VC in 2021, even though we're always a Bitcoin VC, but making sure that was more outwardly perceived by entrepreneurs. And then the conversation started going from, okay, Abubakar, don't you feel it's kind of against the value proposition of a venture capital fund to kind of risk all your investments in one specific category, which is the Bitcoin space? But then my counter argument has always been the same from the start, which is if we're talking about long-term, which all VCs should be geared to, at least this is what LPs should want to hear from you, then you have to make sure that you're actually positioning yourself for the long game and not the short-term game of all these, DeFi and kind of these wazoo, out of the wazoo type of tech stuff. So for me, it was natural that if we're saying in the long term, what are the things that we're looking at? It has to be within the Bitcoin space. And it only makes sense for us to bet on something that has that sort of long-term stability, really, and will be there in the next 10, 20 years. So for me, it was simple. It was, okay, the only thing that's likely going to last in this space is going to be Bitcoin. And out of that, there's definitely going to be an ecosystem that will be birthed out of that, because it is going to be the thing that people will constantly continue to build on. So what does it mean for us as a Bitcoin VC to position ourselves to capture that value that's going to keep on increasing and also keep on being discovered, really, as we not only fund companies, but also engage with entrepreneurs. So the conversation have definitely changed from why risk all of that in Bitcoin to what are the things you're seeing in the Bitcoin space. I mean, when we first launched, there was no Africa Bitcoin ecosystem to begin with. So it's obviously nice to see that now the conversations are around what's happening in that ecosystem. And I feel we'll likely have a lot more participants. I wouldn't necessarily say there'll be more funds being created, because, again, a lot of people do feel skeptical that there isn't still maybe a large enough business case to warrant their involvement. But for us, that is a perfect opportunity, because it just means we further get to establish ourselves as the market drivers and players here in the continent. So by the time they do get there, it's a case where Recursive has built the ecosystem to the point where it's essentially very high signal, as well as we capture a lot of the value, really, for our limited partners, ensuring we're making sure that people that come into the continent from outside are not bringing perverse incentives into the continent, essentially, which is one of the main reasons why I launched the fund to begin with.
And I want to ask you about launching the fund, like how you're a developer and you're running a fund. Those are two things that typically don't go hand in hand. How on earth? I mean, and you're obviously a young man. You've got an old soul in my heart's opinion, and so very wise and mature, and just wow, what a presence. And so, how did you combine these two gifts and passions of yours?
I mean, a lot of it is really just sitting down and reflecting, and kind of like you said, projecting out into kind of the distant future and seeing what are the things that first need to be done right now to get to that point, and what are the things that we need to prioritize, and how can we essentially create all those foundational blocks that would benefit everyone else coming after us. Because at the end of the day, my main goal really is obviously to obsolete myself in the space, because that's the only true tale way, essentially, of finding out whether things actually grow or not. Because if you still have the same players in a decade, 20 years, then honestly, there's definitely not a lot of growth here. So for me, it's a case where I want to make sure we have all the foundational pieces in play so we actually have a real flourishing ecosystem. So a lot of that had to do with realizing early on that capital allocation is going to be a very, very big part of growing out that ecosystem. Because again, to your point, yes, there is the development that's necessary and is the bedrock of everything that anyone is doing in this space, regardless of where they're providing value. But at the same time, there are going to be a lot of instances where the business case will need to be further developed so that the general ecosystem does have products and services that service folks in the ecosystem. So for me, it was a case of saying, okay, yes, I am a dev and all that, but what are some of the strengths that I could leverage based on my expertise as a developer? So for me, straightforward, it was, okay, yes, I'm launching the fund, but the main priority for me is to kind of hone in the skill of calling out things that are not worthwhile investment-wise, and making sure that I prioritize kind of my bullshit meter, essentially, of detecting whether something is useful long-term or not. And then over time, it became, okay, understanding on the operational side, what does it mean to actually run a Bitcoin VC? What does it mean to run a VC in general? What does it mean to create ecosystems from scratch? What does it mean to kind of erect pipelines? What is the interplay between that and the development space? So I've been fortunate enough to be at different points in kind of different parts of the ecosystem that allow me kind of a unique viewpoint into the whole space from a holistic standpoint, in the sense that I'm aware of all the things happening in development ecosystem, as well as on the entrepreneurial side and the VC space. So combining those two over time has been, one, making sure I sharpen my skills on the dev side, being able to call that on the technical side. Two, engaging with developers constantly to ensure that all the folks that are building are informed and building for things that people are seeing both on the ground as well as from the development side. And then on the VC side, it's a case of being able to immediately pick out between whether something has a good business case or not, whether there's some more growth to be had, really, which is why over time is when I kind of increased some of the capacity that I had at Recursive, because essentially I was just a CTO at Recursive, and then eventually had to step into the CEO role when I felt comfortable enough and in my abilities to kind of lead the project itself. So that's essentially how I've kind of navigated the space in the last, I'd say, 5 years now. It feels like a decade plus so far, but that's just what happens with Bitcoin. It ages you tremendously.
Well, I think it ages you with the wisdom because you're such a young, beautiful soul. And like I said, I'm just like, wow, I'm so impressed with you and everything you're doing. And let's talk. Do you want to talk about Volt? And is Volt a project of Recursive, or is it an open source project? Do you want to tell everybody about what's going on over there?
So yeah, definitely. And with Volt, it's very interesting. So it started with a few conversations with Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation back in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the dynamics at the time was, again, we had the Bitcoin ban here in Nigeria, which essentially which essentially prohibited, I'd say, the interaction between bank transfers and Bitcoin payments, essentially. So a lot of the feature of the landscape was kind of put into question. So my thinking at the time was, okay, we can start building for resilience right now to a point where when we do get to these government bans or maybe some of the policies that will come on the regulatory side that might disrupt the ecosystem, we do have fallbacks, especially on an open source level in terms of the code, resilience, all of that. So eventually over time, it became a case where eventually got the grant from Alex to start work on this back in 2021. And from 2021 to around, I say 2023 has been honestly looking at exactly what the main pain points are, because I wasn't about to start building and dictating to people things that I feel should be taken seriously in the space. So it was a case of one, experimenting, because I started the project like 3 times from scratch. So essentially forked Blue Wallet initially and then realized that wasn't going to go anywhere. Then I started from scratch again, realized that wasn't going to go anywhere. And then in 2023, that was like a year plus after understanding exactly what the main pain points are around UX, ensuring that things work with Lightning from day one, hiding a lot of that and obscuring some of the technical parts of what it means to run a Bitcoin wallet. And then it started from basically building the basics of what a wallet should be like. So around new technologies for, even when it comes to self-custody tools around wallet descriptors, all the way up to using Lightning, some of the bold card stuff that we've seen, incredible work out of the BT Pay server team and the general ecosystem they created out of that through the conferences and battle testing that. So a lot of that was, okay, by this year, around this year, it was a case where I had the opportunity to launch it at the Human Rights Also Freedom Forum, which is obviously kind of like a full circle moment for me, because it all started with HRF essentially with the wallet. So for me, on the wallet side, really, it's pretty straightforward. We're saying we want to make sure that all this building that we're seeing is going to come out of the continent. A lot of that is going to start happening. So for me, it was a case of saying, okay, here's a wallet that I feel, based on all the interactions I've had with developers and entrepreneurs, that would serve as kind of a good fallback and kind of a reference point for what it means to build a good Bitcoin wallet. And eventually having that be a case where African builders band together to build this wallet for everyone else that wants that same level of resiliency around the world. So essentially my gift and kind of a way for me to see the ecosystem to start building along the lines of ensuring resilience is kept at that level of building, as well as making sure that we do have projects that other folks can look onto to understand exactly what we mean by Africans are going to start building for the Bitcoin space and going to lead at that building. So for me, it was a case of just putting essentially my quote unquote skills, both as a designer as well as a builder, to the test, and also kind of seeding that to see what happens. So it's been cool. The reception has been very interesting to see other developers from the BTrust pipeline also helping out now with pull requests and things like that. And that's generally the plan for it, to remain open source, ensure that people band together to build for it. And we'll see what happens moving forward in terms of what that looks like, whether that gets flipped out into a venture or not. It's one of those things where the community will see and decide, essentially.
And so just with, obviously we've got, and congratulations, 3 times, that's a lot. I know a lot of people might quit after 1 or 2 and be like, oh, forget it. And then you're obviously tenacious and saw this through. And so, there's obviously lots and lots of Bitcoin wallets out there. Why do we need to keep building more Bitcoin wallets? And is there anything out there that is ubiquitous in all the countries that's anybody can use, or are we constantly looking at limitations from each country and regulations and Apple Store and la la la? What are the are you aiming to hopefully have a ubiquitous wallet, or is that even a possibility in the way that our world is currently?
So I'll say a few things. So thinking about the general space, specifically contrasting Bitcoin with the wider, let's say, fintech or traditional space of building products and services, one of the main differences between the two is there is a tendency for kind of monopolizing the set of tools that people use on the level of being ubiquitous, like you mentioned. But that's in the general internet space where the incentives are essentially to lock in users and then monetize or grow based on that user base that you've accumulated. But the Bitcoin space, and specifically with Nostr as well, pairing those two, the incentives are the opposite. Really, for you to win out long term, it's a case of ensuring that your products and services are the most interoperable, provide the best UX, and kind of compete on the level of providing the best experience essentially for Bitcoiners. So I feel it's not, yes, in the traditional markets or development spaces, it makes sense to kind of wonder why we need more X or more specific products and services. But in the Bitcoin space, you likely keep seeing a lot of these things. And what wins out actually is a case where you have something that's highly interoperable, leverages all the mature tools, and even leaning into some of the things that need to get mature that people would need to use. So I feel with regards to Vault and maybe other projects that will likely probably see moving forward, the idea is to mimic a lot of those value propositions that people are currently exploring or should be explored, putting all these safety mechanisms to a point where, again, we might not reach ubiquity with Vault, but I want to make sure it's at a stage where it is kind of, like I said, a reference point for a lot of people in terms of what should be built and what folks could use on the daily. Because again, no one's going to bring out a new wallet that is going to be the only wallet that Bitcoiners use. A lot of Bitcoiners that you, I'm sure, have interacted with, and even yourself, have a ton of wallets. So a lot of things that win out is, again, if you ask yourself, why do I use this specific wallet more than the others? It has to do with both the UX, how that ties into your life in terms of providing value. Are you able to move volumes through that? Is it a case where it's a savings angle? Is it more secure than the others? So definitely different use cases for different wallets. But I feel with something like Vault, I want to make sure it focuses in on the most pertinent use cases so that it becomes a daily driver for a lot of Bitcoiners and not necessarily the only wallet that they're going to use, because I feel that's unrealistic.
I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. I know we all want to test all the wallets and certainly use some for different purposes, hot wallets, cold wallets, deep storage, all that.
Exactly.
So is there anything that you've run across on this journey that you're just like, we haven't been able to solve for this issue yet in any of the wallets, in any of the, like customers wanting something and some kind of feature functionality that is just a big stuck point? I'd just be curious.
I mean, there are a couple. I think the ones that are still going to be necessary moving forward, especially given the dynamics I've seen on the continent here in Africa, has been around focusing in on and off ramping, specifically with no KYC P2P tools. Like the main challenge we've had is, and it's kind of also an opportunity. Obviously now Binance virtually doesn't exist especially in places like Nigeria, with the Naira pair essentially being taken out because of pressure from the government and things like that. So there is a huge opportunity for players that are both in Africa as well as outside of Africa to service that market of P2P that has a tremendous amount of volume, which we lead globally. So I feel if we're able to capture a good amount of that through no KYC P2P rails, then we kind of fortify that fundamental level of liquidity provision, where we're not necessarily locking them into some of the walled gardens or some of the custodial services that could result in locked liquidity, which doesn't help with any sort of commerce or markets in general. So I want to make sure that we have the opportunity for people that are coming in and kind of engaging with the Bitcoin ecosystem to have that level of unbounded liquidity. Obviously not ensuring that we have tools in place to kind of mitigate some of the folks that are doing nefarious activities, but at the same time ensuring that the main priority is on providing services that maximize both free will as well as kind of the general privacy, people maintaining their privacy and kind of their autonomy in the space and not just dictating down. So I see that a lot of that has to do with building around no KYC P2P bridges. I think if we're able to solve that both for on-ramping and off-ramping, a lot of the other work will kind of just be a natural downstream from some of those efforts. So we'll see what that happens, and then building resilience around some of the tools that we're building that, let me choose my words carefully so I don't reveal things. But essentially ensuring that some projects are focusing on, again, that resiliency that matches the level that we need at the continent, ensuring that people can't just ban some of the tools that we're building. And it would become just as hard of a way to ban it as, let's say, banning the entirety of maybe the commercial markets in Africa. So making it that entrenched to the point where it can actually have a future and a chance to actually still be around in a decade plus.
And is that like something that's in the form of a protocol and not an app? Or is that how we keep things safe, sort of like how Nostr and Bitcoin worked? That it's
Both.
protocol, it's not the platforms where they can get us?
Yeah, essentially, it has to be both. Because again, on the protocol side, we want to make sure, even at the Bitcoin core level, that a lot of these guarantees and assurances are there from day one. But then downstream from that, again, we also want to make sure that some of the additional networks that we're creating on top of that, whether it's for liquidity provision, also mimic a lot of that resiliency. And then building off of that would be the tools and services also mimic those levels of resiliency. So we have like a full-on end-to-end ecosystem where we're guaranteeing all these assurances from day one through all the ways in which you can interact with Bitcoin. Because the major issue is going to be not necessarily that is Bitcoin going to be around in the next decade plus. We already know that's likely going to be the case. The issue is going to be, would it be the same access of Bitcoin that people right now have versus those that would be coming after us? So I think that's where the main focus should be on the development side, and ensuring that even people in the future have a way better experience of Bitcoin and a lot more of the guarantees from day one than we currently do.
Yeah, it's definitely intimidating when you think about all the regulations in different places, right? And you think of here in the States with the 6102, now we've got the, I think it's the CFTC, the commodities. They're trying to turn Bitcoin into commodity, and then there's going to be some whole shit show. So I'm not totally up on all of this, regulation stuff, but I know it's pretty intimidating to think if you're stacking for a while and you're like, hey, this is going to be my future. And then the government can come in and say, nope, you need to go turn all your Bitcoin into us, and we're going to give you some paper Bitcoin, which is worthless. And so it's super important for all of us to think about, how to be adversarial in our development and adversarial and thinking, they're not looking out for us. They're looking out for the survival of themselves, which is this beast Kraken that I call it. And, it just wants to keep feeding itself. So it's like, do people in Nigeria or anywhere where you're working, like, do they understand like how important this is, or do they think like, no, I want to go to my trusted third party bank or whatever? Like, do they catch on? Because here people still don't get it. I mean, it's like 99.9% of the people you talk about why you need decentralization and why self-custody is important and not having this third party. People are they're so brainwashed into the system, it's difficult to really help them understand that, like, no, like you need to cover your booty, because this could really happen at some point, especially with currency collapses everywhere on the horizon.
No, certainly. And I think, a lot of that is, so honestly, a lot of the work has been done and is continuing to be done essentially by governments in Africa for us when it comes to not just evangelizing, but kind of providing case studies for people to look at. Because if you look at the general trajectory of even a country like Nigeria, with all the bans that have happened and all the currency issues, the financial issues, obviously with the devaluation of the currency, the multiple instances that we had at the Naira, kind of the issues we had with the cash crunch with the USD and all of that. I think one thing I would say is I don't think we would need a large majority of the population to understand every single thing that has to do with what are the main values that Bitcoin does provide. I think the best case scenario that I've seen has worked so far has been to kind of show them practically what that means. So what I mean specifically is juxtaposing the realities that they have currently with using, whether it's traditional financial tools like the Naira or, well, virtually no one uses the e-Naira. I was going to cite that, but I digress. So using all those tools and also the alternatives that people profess that exist for Bitcoin, and then contrasting that with what the experience is when you do use Bitcoin, specifically the correct way. So even if it's a case where someone has experience using Bitcoin and it's been a case where they've been doing it maybe through custodial services that have gone bust, contrasting that and going, okay, yes, that was Bitcoin, but that is not exactly the most ideal version of Bitcoin you could use. Here are some more practical tools you could use that actually do guarantee safeguarding your assets essentially long term. So I feel the orange pilling, quote unquote, essentially is more around constantly building these practical tools for people to experiment with, and constantly highlighting case studies that we will continue to see and have seen in the past that have either scammed people or maybe people don't necessarily understand what it means what the benefit is to have maybe private tools or no KYC P2P bridges, and then highlighting, government seizures of money, or even when it comes to a case where maybe you're censored to the point where money becomes censored as well, and how Bitcoin protects against that. So once we have a lot of these tools that are people can experiment with, naturally becomes the case where they do the learning themselves. Because the truth about like orange pilling is it's a two-way street. It's not a case where we just present all these magical things that Bitcoin does. It's a case where people are aware of these things through experimentation, and then they get the guarantees that we've been talking about, and then the conviction takes place, and then that's when the actual orange pilling takes place. And then down the line, because a lot of people tend to say, when do you get orange pilled? A lot of it, if we look at the stories, tend to be retroactive and retrospective, and not necessarily a case where, January 15th was when I was orange pilled. So a lot of that has to do with the personal convictions that they've had that kind of help them navigate through the space, because it is a journey at the end of the day for all of us. So actually, that's kind of how I think a lot of the things will go moving forward, and kind of the things that we've seen. And again, it's one of those things where we want to make sure that we're building for a lot of that resiliency from day one, because if that doesn't exist, then we could talk all we want. As long as people aren't able to actually use it in the way that we claim people can use it, then nothing's going to move forward.
And do you find, obviously, the number one thing, entrepreneurs talk about is like, you need to talk to your customer,
Exactly.
And really understand what's working, what's not, what this journey is. Did they have the transformation that you're promising them? What didn't happen? How does it get better? I mean, I think that's such an important, our two ears are more important than our one mouth.
Exactly.
And listening to everybody. Let's talk about what's on the horizon for you. Like, are you going to be at any events that I should come and see you? Are you going to ABC? I've just had Marcel on yesterday, so I was like, oh my God, I got to get my butt over. That's my bucket list.
Definitely. I'm going to make it to Afro Bitcoin. It's going to be in Nairobi this time. It's actually going to be my first time in Nairobi, so it'll be interesting to see all the Bitcoiners that I've been in touch with for the last couple of years that are there. And obviously, given the situation now in Kenya, is very important for a lot of us in Africa really to look onto the brave, obviously the brave folks, the Bitcoiners that are down there, and kind of what the pain points are on their end, kind of learn from the orange pilling they've done so far, as well as some of the ways in which people are using Bitcoin that maybe we're missing out here in West Africa and other parts. So I think it's going to be an interesting learning experience. I think a lot of people will enjoy both the general vibe of the ecosystem here. I always say it's one of those which is very, very vibrant and has a lot of very, very intelligent deep thinkers. So a lot of people definitely leave with a lot of nuggets. And the other event I'll definitely be making is Riga. So Baltic Honey Badger, that's in, I think, about a month in August. So if folks haven't been to Riga, then I don't know what the hell they're doing.
Don't say that. I want to go. I have so much FOMO. You have no idea. My daughter's starting college, and I'm like, I can't go anywhere.
Oh, no. Next year, hopefully.
Hopefully next year, unless she kicks me out. She's like, Mom, I don't go away. I don't want your help. Like, if she does that, I mean, I doubt she's going to, because who knows? Maybe she will, but it's right around that time. But yeah, that's a super FOMO. Are you guys going to be doing some hackathons there?
Yeah, we're definitely we're looking at having another hackathon for Afro Bitcoin. So yeah, we'll definitely keep folks in the loop with regards to how that transpires, the theme, things like that, and how to register and be involved.
And will there also be hackathons in Riga?
Not that I'm aware of, but another thing that might interest a lot of people is that Nostr is happening there. So for a lot of folks that are interested in Nostr development and kind of the ecosystem there is going to be paired with the general OG Bitcoin conference vibe that Baltic Honey Badger traditionally has had.
That's going to be so amazing. What have you seen in the Nostr space, if anything, that is just like leaping forward, because obviously we're coming up, like I've noticed I'm on, Twitter, and I was doing a bunch of different posts and looked at some analytics, and everything this month has been down about 70% reach. And I've been a little snarky lately on Twitter, but nothing like the stuff that I see other people posting that are getting millions of follows and likes and reach and all this. I'm just like, I'm not posting anything near that snarky and cursing and the whole thing. And I'm just like, so it's frustrating. And I know that all, here in the States and a lot of the place in the world, there's a lot of elections this year. So I feel like things are getting suppressed, our voices are definitely getting censored, and there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes with the algorithms. Like, have you seen anything with Nostr that is, going to start pulling ahead so that we can get people using it and not feeling like, what's an NPub and it all that stuff, that is a little weird at first.
Yeah, I mean, a lot is likely going to help contribute to, again, drawing in that ubiquity for folks to kind of think, okay, social media, I think Nostr is one of the options in kind of the general milieu that we have. But I think the one thing I've been interested in seeing kind of evolve over time has been, again, the value for value use case really with Nostr, which is allowing for a mechanism to actually reward people that provide something you find of value, even when it just comes to zapping in general. I still think that's hugely underrated, with the general public not being aware of that mechanism generally for social interaction. So I feel a lot of what we'll likely see in terms of the onboarding will likely be as a result of that shared use case. And what that'll look like is, again, a lot of the tools, one of the benefits of the Nostr space is obviously they move really fast, which is very helpful for quickly testing out things that do work and things that don't work, and understanding kind of how people receive and perceive a lot of these changes. Because again, there are no walled gardens. So it's a case where a lot of folks that even currently do use Nostr are not just using one primary client. It's a case where they're using it through a variety of mechanisms, different essentially tools and services. So it'll be a case where the more well-built the tools get, the more it becomes more of a good argument really for people that are considering an alternative to X, or maybe some of the traditional social media that they find toxic, for example. And again, by the very fact that we have this mechanism for actually rewarding things that people find of value on social media, I feel is going to also, pairing that with a lack of censorship to begin with, since it is a protocol, those two I think combined will likely maximize kind of the general way people feel social media should be, which is a person navigating all these sources of information for themselves and sieving out and sorting out what the signals are. And then obviously having tools in place to actually maximize that effort to, whether it's a case where you have your own specific algos that cater to maybe maximizing certain content that you deem signal and things like that. But just generally ensuring that we're providing for individuals to maximize all the alternatives that they have and opportunities to see all sides of whatever tail it is that they're looking at or angle. That way we don't have people who are being told exactly how to think or providing, biased standpoint. So striving to essentially be objectively biased in kind of how we see through information around that. So I think that's how Nostr would likely take off. And I feel the more people that come into Nostr that are not in the Bitcoin space, the better for Nostr in general, because we don't want a case where it's seen as just a Twitter for Bitcoiners, essentially. We want to make sure that people understand that this is a novel social media experience for the whole world.
Well, I think too, getting in different types of creators and educators and people who, have different ways that they're earning income, through plays or through their education that they're up to. And so, we're doing this thing with the Bitcoiner Hub, and we're going to have, it's going to be a whole value for value education model. And so we want people to be able to just, if they want to make a value for value exchange with the creators, great. If not, the content's there, no big deal. And so for us as, any type of a creator, whether it's music, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a course, whether it's a blog, whether it's, anything, a meme, it's really fun for all of us to do this for, because we're passionate, but it's also important that, we earn a living so that we can, get milk for our children. And so I think retraining ourselves as consumers and as creators is very, very important, because we're so used to getting everything for free because we're the product, obviously, from the advertisement perspective. This is something I think is a unique challenge, and you and I had talked about the super wallet concept, which I started whiteboarding yesterday. You'll be proud of me. I'll share with you when I get it, when I get round one done. But that's something that I was even thinking, just from that super wallet mindset of having that, your content wallet that could go as just a segment of all the other types of wallets that are out there. It doesn't even have to be its own standalone thing. It could just be, it could go in the Volt wallet. It can go into Strike. It could go into anything, so that, okay, here's my content and my Lightning budget. That's going to be a little, module that's in all of these things. And so I think that could be something in it. I don't know. That just came to me when you were talking, but I think it, for all of us to be able to have that mindset of I love supporting my creators or my developers, and so I think this will be a fun project to kind of to play with. But do you feel like is there any platform or any client side stuff that's out there that is geared for education using Nostr, from a course perspective, where it's here you go, it's one thing to have a blog post or 5 blog posts in a row, and you can say, cool, this is section 1 through 5, blah, blah. Have you seen anything being built on that for education?
Not a lot, but I would say like there are a couple of things that are emerging that I think are very relevant to kind of how that would play out, and to the extent that we see that happen or not. Is, again, one is Geyser. I think has been very interesting to see, because one of the main issues we've had, or at least I've kind of seen and folks have outlined, is the Bitcoin space has to, for it to get to a point where it's growing, is when we start to think about building tools and services that are not just for other Bitcoiners, because there's only so many Bitcoiners that we could provide tools and services for, to the point where it becomes so saturated that there's no more growth in terms of folks actually getting involved, which obviously the majority of people that actually need Bitcoin are non-Bitcoiners right now, if we're looking at it from that standpoint. So I feel a lot of the efforts around even the things that Geyser has been able to facilitate when it comes to just allowing for money flows to happen in places that don't necessarily have that access with traditional fundraising mechanisms, is, I feel, going to be very, very powerful, and would likely leave a lasting impact in terms of how people perceive the value proposition of Bitcoin overall to humanity. Because I feel if we get to that stage where people are using tools built by Bitcoiners without necessarily being Bitcoiners, then that is the point where we understand, the proverbial Bitcoin is now mainstream. I feel that's when we reach that mainstream level of both adoption as well as sentiment that people have. And then I say, in terms of how that plays into education, is one, we already have mechanism now, like, Geyser, where people can actually post their educational efforts to get funded. But a lot of funding has also come into the space that wasn't there 5 years ago through other initiatives, whether it's BTrust or OpenSats, for example, especially with the education grant section that OpenSats recently announced. I think a lot of that is going to help catalyze, given the fact that a lot of the activity also on the funding side has been through OpenSats. So it's cool to see, obviously, them getting into the education ecosystem. I feel they're likely going to help propel a lot of these projects that you're talking about that maybe don't exist right now, that could exist. But at least those are kind of the trends I'm seeing that I feel will be really, really important, and will be a concomitant part, essentially, to how we not only scale out this ecosystem, but provide that sort of awareness to non-Bitcoiners that, hey, we're not just building and it's an echo chamber, this actual value that we feel that people should get access to. And these are the ways in which you can get access to. And that's the only way we can know whether we're just talking to ourselves about things that don't necessarily exist as use cases, or if they're actually useful things to the rest of the world.
Totally. And I think, again, like coming back to getting more people outside of the Bitcoin, space into Bitcoin, it's like, again, coming to the creators, educators, anybody out there who, $100 a month, $500 a month makes a difference, And so if you're getting zaps, instead of just like, okay, I get $1 for every 1,000 plays on, Spotify, if I'm a musician, if you're getting $100 because you're building that fan base through Nostr, it's such a game changer. And so to consider all of the 99% of creators out there who aren't with big labels, who don't have giant marketing budgets, who don't have agents, so if they understand, think about the millions and millions of, creators out there, and artists and coaches and, people out there in that space, in the wellness community, like an extra 100, 500,000 bucks a month, and you're providing direct value to your audience, and you're getting that feedback, knowing like, wow, Abubakar keeps, zapping me on this kind of a post. This is great. I know that he really likes this stuff. So I'm going to, send him a big thank you. You don't know who's listening to your content on these big channels, whether it's Tidal or Spotify or whatever. I think it's super, like, that to me, once that domino can get knocked over and we can really start helping these folks, these millions and millions of creatives out there, like, they're going to be like, well, why am I not doing this? Heck yeah, this is cool. This is easy. I can do these splits. I can, get my producer paid. I get myself paid. And then, wow, what a neat way for the system to grow, instead of just being in these other walled gardens of the record labels or of the central, distribution channels like, Amazon and Apple and whatnot. So I think it's going to be, value for value is still really small, and it doesn't mean it's your main source of revenue as a creative or an educator, but it sure does help with, a little bit more each month, perhaps, if we could get this out there. So that's going to be it is one of my goals, is to help, creatives understand how Bitcoin can get into their ecosystem, and then not having to wait for 90 to 180 days to get your payouts, So it's like, nope, look, you got it instantly today because someone's listening to your stuff today. Or so I think, what Wave Lake and those guys are doing. There's so many great projects out there, and it's going to be fun to keep seeing how these artists go from zero to hopefully more than zero in the Bitcoin world.
No, 100%, 100%. And I think one of the things that will be interesting to see is sieving through the way, or at least seeing how the evolution happens with regards to artists and content creators and how they engage with their fan base through, zapping and things like that. Because again, there are a variety of ways you can get high signal in terms of how people are receiving your content. And there's no better way really than getting zapped and knowing that, okay, that person did find it useful. So you actually have meaningful metrics and not just, plays or listens, which obviously can be gamed. It's a case where if someone did send you money, then it's a case where they definitely like that type of content. So again, like you said, we're not at a stage where it can form the main source of income, but the very fact that that mechanism exists and the fact that people are already using it with the small ecosystem that we have, I think it's a huge indicator that there's not only a large opportunity here, but I think is one of those things where we've been looking at from a paradigm shift perspective that could actually make or break the future of what it means to be a content creator and how people can monetize by themselves of their own volition and not necessarily being the product.
Totally. I mean, I think why doesn't Spotify and all of these big companies just have an opportunity for zapping your artists? Think about it. If you're a distributor, right? Your goal is to have the best content out there and the best products and the best, things for your audience who are paying these, monthly subscriptions. So, knowing that you're only able to pay a little bit per play, to these new artists, wouldn't it make sense from a business standpoint if you knew it doesn't cost you a penny at all, you still get your subscription model, and then you add this layer of zapping into your platform? I mean, holy cow, that would be great, because then now the artists are getting, a little bit of supplementation. So guess what? Now they can actually make more content instead of having to go flip burgers at McDonald's and then hopefully get a new song out on, their spare time. So it's such a no-brainer to me. Why wouldn't they want to implement, here you go, just add a little zap button, and there you go. They've got the wallet, whatever, take 5% if you really think you need to make money to Spotify on your artist, but give it to the artist, So I don't know. I'd love to see if why is Jack not doing this on Tidal? That would be something. Come on, Jack, where are you, brother?
I mean, who knows? Maybe those conversations are happening.
I want to see this, and that would be amazing if that could start happening for the creators, Anyways, I'm just rambling on. I want to just talk really quick, if you have time, about, you and I've had a couple really nice, deep conversations about our spiritual journey and about some personal growth that we've gone through. And I would love to ask you about, what's been your personal growth transformation before and after becoming a Bitcoiner?
Oof. A lot has definitely changed, in terms of both my outlook on life, the priorities I have in my life as well, and how I assess priorities moving forward, how I kind of critique myself. Obviously, that self-love too is one of those things where I'm definitely at a point where I'm a lot more mature in terms of handling things that get thrown out, the adversities of life and things like that, and especially welcoming adversity in general. I think a lot of that spiritual growth has mimicked, obviously, my own personal growth through, Islam. And a lot of that has been really around, for folks that are familiar with Stoic philosophy, essentially, where you're looking at the things that you can control within your realm of control, and not necessarily hanging on to things that are outside of your control, because those are one of the primary sources of anxiety to begin with. Yeah. And just being comfortable with who you are as a person and knowing that you're not one thing at a specific point in time, but you have essentially a set of ideals that you'd like to move forward and progress towards. And that becomes some sort of the foundation for your identity, in the sense that you're always trying to strive for those ideals, and not necessarily a case where you feel this is who you are, you can't change or you can't grow. Because then that's where people get into the trap of, getting into abusive relationships or even being abusive to themselves, which is the worst relationship you can possibly have. So again, having for that capacity for growth, understanding that not having pride is the only way in which you could actually grow. Because if you're unable to take in things outside or handle situations on the adversary, in terms of adversity. And there's really no way for you to kind of process that and reflect, especially, which is something that's seldom done in a lot of in the world currently. So I feel, before Bitcoin, I was definitely just a stereotypical kid, just different priorities, music, games, all that kind of stuff. And then over the course of the last couple of years, given all the opportunities I've had and I've been blessed with, I feel it has definitely changed the way I understand and kind of even relate to people. Like, I was a lot more, I'd say maybe louder than I am now currently. And over time, you start to realize that the best case scenario you could have really is to learn rather than just speak. So a lot of my interactions have definitely changed with folks that I previously were friends with or continue to be friends with. And yeah, it's definitely been one of those things where striving for a healthy version of myself, I've seen has also benefited folks that I actually care about that are close to me in my life, in terms of how I engage with them, how I also critique them, how I provide them with, the empathy that's necessary for them to also grow. And that also helps with my own accountability in terms of, mutual exchange of love and things like that. So I'd say that in a nutshell, that's kind of how it shifted and kind of changed over the years. And definitely glad that I went through this progression. It could have easily just taken me 40 years to figure that out, probably even die without figuring a lot of these things that I've been forced to contend with over the last couple of years. But again, it's also one of those things that, the space is so small that folks don't really care about your age coming in. And it's the only concern that a lot of people have is, the value that you provide. And that's why over time, I've kind of just found it a lot easier to optimize that as opposed to just, being the young guy doing a lot of things. So that's definitely another thing that has been very, very useful.
That's amazing. And do you feel like this space, I feel like I've met so many high signal, high quality people, especially men, and I'm comparing, our ecosystem and our ethos, with other folks out there in the world, whether they're corrupt, whether they're just, living kind of, NPC-ish type lives, I used to be an NPC, totally I'm not acting like I'm somebody special here, but it's like once you get Bitcoin in your blood and in your system and your whole, everything starts to shift, and I feel like, there's so many wonderful men who embrace, the typical, not typical, but, a traditional model of what a man is, and the model of being masculine and, and it's not about, power over, clobber women and pull them by their hair. But it's really about that personal responsibility. It's about integrity. It's about what you said, showing up with value and how are you creating, the world around you to be a safer, better, more prosperous place. Do you find that you're, encountering a lot more of those people in the Bitcoin space and the people are transforming as they come in, into that space? Or do you think people who are already kind of in that masculine vibe are naturally gravitating towards Bitcoin? I don't know if that's a long ass question.
No. It is. It's good to have it all painted out clearly. I think it's the latter, to be honest with you. I found that, at least, based on my life experiences in general, is for a lot of people that are principled and actually have a high level of, self-worth, really low ego, very driven, very, very high value. And that standpoint is they tend to also constantly accumulate other values essentially over time that maximize those. So I think naturally it makes sense to me that a lot of the Bitcoiners that we see tend to be folks that are already at that stage in their life where they're looking to continue to align themselves with things that maximize things that they value long-term in terms of being principled, high value, all of that. And I think it's not a case where it's necessarily Bitcoin itself that causes that change. I think obviously for any sort of meaningful change to happen to anybody really requires that inner self-reflection and that acceptance really of both the realities on the ground as well as things that you should be orienting yourself towards. So it makes a lot of sense that with all the things that are happening in the world right now, there are very, very few things that you could actually orient yourself towards that maximize that sort of level of conscientiousness or understanding, being virtuous and things like that. And Bitcoin just happens to be one of those things. And obviously there is the spiritual angle that you mentioned too, with orienting yourself towards God, something outside of yourself, subjecting your ego, ensuring that that is now a mechanism for you to drive for self-growth as opposed to kind of growth within the compartment of essentially yourself. So now you have unbounded growth essentially, which is something that should be useful. So I'd say, yeah, that's definitely how I see it. And I think we'll likely continue to see that. And I hope it continues to be the case, because that's one telltale sign of whether we've essentially done the work that we should be doing in the Bitcoin spaces, depending on if we still have folks that are that principled driving at least the ecosystem on a meaningful level or not. And I think that's going to be even more important than just building, to be honest, because the most important thing is the folks that are in the space vis-a-vis some of the products, because they go hand in hand in terms of maintaining the stability.
Yeah, it's about the people, and obviously the people at large in the whole world that hopefully we can serve and get out of this matrix that we are living in, which is crazy. I definitely feel Bitcoin has transformed my heart and my soul in a way that is just wow. And it keeps doing it every day. It's like a little onion layer, like, whoa, I didn't know that was there. And that challenges me to come forward in a better way, and not just not settle for like a lazy version of myself, and I think it's like, and there's no, like what I love about our community, Bitcoiners and this freedom lovers community, it's like we hold each other up, but nobody's like shaming each other. And really, I think it's really powerful. Yes, there's a lot of snarky comments out there in the Twitter world, which is fun, kind of, but, and then obviously some of them are a little over the top, but I think for the most part, if we're out there, putting our best foot forward, there's always going to be 100 people there ready to like be the wind beneath your wings and like give you encouragement and give you care and enthusiasm. And they'll call you on bullshit too. Just be like, I don't think so, which is needed. We don't need a bunch of yes men out here.
Exactly. It definitely helps. And again, even with just navigating the space in general, it's been one of those life lessons that folks need to, learn early on, or at least be aware of to try and navigate the space effectively, is understanding that intelligence in one domain, specifically being a highly intelligent Bitcoiner, whether it's on the technical side or otherwise, does not translate into intelligence in other domains, whether it's like politics or things like that. I've seen a lot of that transpire on X, especially with regards to people seeing certain folks that are highly intelligent on the Bitcoin side, but then say the most absurd things politically. And you can tell there's definitely a lot of, to get to into the specifics, but definitely a level of maturity that's missing, that hasn't been translated from some of the other disciplines and maturity that they have in other domains. So I think the earlier people get that out of the way, the better that they're able to navigate through the space, because we're human at the end of the day. No one's going to be perfect and have like pristine takes on every single thing. And learning to compartmentalize and dealing with people accordingly is going to be very, very valuable as you navigate the space, because we're going to continue to have very interesting people coming to the space, people from parts of the world that you have no idea, culturally speaking, and things like that. So understanding where everyone is coming from, not taking things to heart, ensuring that you're constantly being a force of good as opposed to contributing to all the chaos. I think it's kind of the only way we could make sure that this space continues to exist and provide all the value that we feel it currently does and should in the future.
I agree. And I know I feel like we're always getting checked out there. And what you said too, just about if somebody's got, great skills and intelligence or capabilities in this area or this domain, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be equal in all of the domains of life, and a lot of times some people will be like, oh, I'm so great at relationships and communication, but I'm not that great with technicals or numbers, and vice versa. And so I think we have to always remember to just that we're just humans. We're just human blobs walking around trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Just one last question. What would you say to somebody who, is a young person and maybe, doesn't have to be super young, but who's interested in getting involved in the space, in Africa? Like where would you tell them to go? How would you tell them to start, reaching out, connecting with you or with BTrust, and, what's the best way for people to start, dipping their toe in, especially if they're brand new?
Yeah, a lot. And I think they're definitely coming at a good time. Like 5 years, 10 years back, there was virtually no resources that were accessible to people outside of the space. I think one of the main things is, there's this thing by James Dunlop that he has where it's essentially kind of a treasure trove of a self-paced set of, tools, services, and resources for people to kind of check out say that'll be just a wider resource that people should be aware of. And I say more specifically here in Africa, the touch points are very straightforward, in my opinion, would be if you're located in, let's say, a place like Nairobi or maybe Lagos or Abuja or Kampala, we already have bid devs essentially sponsored from, BTrust, where they could go and meet other Bitcoiners and start the journey from there on. Another one would be on the development side. If they're developers and they're looking to get into the space, the best case scenario for them is to reach out to BTrust Builders, probably follow the X account. We post a lot, especially sign up to the newsletter, a lot of great gems there about both the development and the ecosystem generally, as well as, information about the training that we do in general and, grant applications, all of that. Another thing I would say is just generally following, the activity in the space, following Bitcoiners that are here on the continent. I would say, I write a Forbes column. That's one of the things that I prioritize, which is writing about, and I'd say maybe chronicling essentially all the development that's happening here in Africa. So looking at that, being subscribed to a lot of these other newsletters, especially the Human Rights Foundation newsletter, I think that's very useful. They have a Bitcoin section that's always on point in terms of the main things being captured that are happening that are significant. So I say those are the main things, to be honest. And the most important is just don't feel like there's any such thing as like a stupid question that you're asking, because all of us, there's no one that knew about Bitcoin except Satoshi. So we're all learning at the end of the day. And I think another thing would be, especially for the younger folks, like it's very easy to get hung up on putting your identity as the young person, quote unquote. But it's also very important to realize that being young is just a very, very small part of your life. So the moment you start to attach yourself to that is when you tend to have a lot of the life crisis down the line of, as you age, starting to realize that, okay, what does it mean to be me? And then you start to, spiral off essentially with anxiety creeping in. So once you're able to understand that, yes, you're going to be young for a small amount of time. So it means you should maximize a lot of things like orienting yourself principle wise and ensuring that virtue is something that you do prioritize. Then it becomes very, very easy for you to transition into the bulk of your existence, which is being an older person. So I think, a lot of that has to do with accepting, advice, critique, criticism, mentorship, and then gradually graduating into a mentorship role yourself as well, because that helps reduce your ego, subject yourself to also, mutual kind of learning with the person that you're mentoring and things like that. So I'd say that's how I would give general advice with regards to navigating the space and ensuring that they don't get distracted. There's a lot that's happening in the space always. Make sure that you're a person who constantly is striving to provide value and constantly learning. And ensure that, you just don't get distracted. It's very, very easy to get distracted. A lot of things happening in the space. There'll always keep being a lot of things. And once you have a lot of those things sorted out personally, it's going to be a lot easier for you to change the world once you've actually conquered the self.
Yeah, and it's a never-ending dance of the ego, the battle of the ego, and the soul and the love and the heart. And I really love you said to prioritize virtue in your life. I think that's really, really powerful statement. A lot of us, especially, if you're hungry, if you're starving, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, it's difficult sometimes. Like you're just like, I need to get that food in my child's mouth or in my mouth. And virtue isn't necessarily on the top of your list. It's satisfying that hunger. And so I think for so many of us to remember like why we need a sound money system and why it is imperative that we keep moving this forward as to me, it's the most important initiative on earth, because if we don't have that, then people aren't going to be able to live virtuous lives because they're hungry, they're starving, they're afraid, they're in danger. And, if this monetary system is completely broken and corrupt, which it is, it's going to continue to perpetuate that. And we're never going to be able to rise up to who we are all meant to be, which is children of God, in these beautiful expressions of love and this beautiful expression of harmony and peace on earth. And so that's why I know I'm so passionate about learning myself and trying to help other people understand and connect the dots about why this sound money is hopefully a tool for a more peaceful world. So we're on the same team. Yay. I hope I get to see you in December. That's going to be my bucket list dream, to get over to ABC. And so
definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So any final word like to tell everybody? We want to make sure people who are listening and aren't on the video, they go to follow you on X at IHate1999. You can also look at builders.btrust.tech if you guys are interested in checking out. I'm going to have everything, of course, in the show notes and all the links, so you can check out Abubakar over there. But yeah, just one final quickie closing.
Let me channel my inner Matt Odell. I'll say stay humble and stack sats, and definitely prioritize virtue over the ego.
Oh, I love it. That'll be like a big theme in this episode for sure. So I love it. Thanks so much for everybody who's tuning in right now, and for you for taking all this time to share your wisdom. And I know you keep doing this great work out there. I can't wait to keep seeing what you're up to and supporting you. And hopefully I'll get to see you in December. So for everybody who's tuning in, thanks again. Peace, love, and warm aloha. And we'll catch you guys next time. And until then, have a wonderful day.